We have the right to self-government, to self-determination of land. And the people that are here are going to go back and continue the struggle. This is not an end, it's only a beginning.
So thanks for joining us. We're here with Krista Leddy, Métis artist and knowledge holder. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Coming up is the Delia Gray Gala, right, which is an annual event.
Yes.
So it's very timely for us to be talking about Delia. We're looking at her portrait on the wall here in the Boardwalk Métis Nation of Alberta office in Edmonton, in a building that's named for her. And you are her granddaughter.
I am.
In addition to all of your own accomplishments that we'll talk about. But maybe we should just start there with Delia, the accomplishments and the legacy for someone who seems to be so highly applauded by the Métis community. What is that meant to the Métis in Alberta, and what is it meant for you?
Well, I think it's a little funny. I'm the youngest grandchild, so I got to see Kukum in I think a different way than my cousin did. And she really spoiled me, and I admit that. I also grew up where people have always talked very, they've spoken with a lot of respect and reverence for Delia. And I've always also been like, she's just my Kukum. So I think there's certain elements I took for granted when I was younger that I understand now. So Delia I never knew Bob, my mushum. He passed away before I was born. But I knew Kukum, and I knew his Métis. I was raised in this family where my mom is German, but my dad is Métis, and knowing both cultures, being raised with both cultures. And that was such an important thing for Kukum to instill in me, was that pride in who I am and where I come from, knowing what that means, knowing how I'm connected, knowing our stories, our culture, everything that is both in the outside identity of Métis, when you're talking about political and identity, be it the inside as well, and sense of spirit and connection. I spent a lot of time with her, especially when she was older, obviously, but the last few years of her life, I had a baby and then two babies, and she loved her great-grandchildren. So whenever there was an opportunity for me to come over or for me to drive her around, she'd call me up and say, "My girl," and everyone will remember that. She would always say, "My girl, my boy." I think sometimes because she forgot our names, but there was also an endearment. "My girl, I need a ride to a do." And usually it was just, she was going to go visit friends, or she wanted a ride to a shopping mall or whatnot. She didn't drive. She lived in downtown Edmonton. That was really close to her community, and it gave her a lot of independence because she would take transit or taxis. She'd also call on her daughters and myself to drive her around. But every so often, she'd phone me up. And of course, that's a day I'm wearing jeans and a T-shirt. The baby has been fussy, and I probably have spit up somewhere. And she would say, "I need a ride." "Okay, Kukum." So I would come over with my car, and she'd insist on sitting in the back seat because she had to sit with the baby and fuss over the baby. And then I would drop her off, and she says, "Come in for a sandwich. I know they have food. You need some food," which was code for she wanted to show the baby off. By the way, I always made sure the baby was dressed very nicely. And I'd walk in, and there was more than one time where I'd walk in, and I'm dressed very casually, again, with baby spit up on my shirt. And there was the Minister of Justice, or the mayor, or councillors, or dignitaries of some sort. And I'd have to stand there very awkwardly in my very plain apparel, holding a baby while she fussed, and would introduce me to them as her friends. To this day, when I see some of those folk, many of them aren't in political office anymore. They're out doing whatever they're doing. They still remember her, and they remember me because of the connection with her. Delia was also the kind of person that worked so hard to build community. There's another book, Stories My Kukum Told Me, and I do tell this story, and it happened more than once, where I'd be with her and she would see someone who was definitely struggling. So either houselessness, addictions, whatever. And she'd walk up to them and she'd recognize them. not necessarily the individual, but she would recognize them as being from community. And after a very short conversation, she would place them. And she would start telling them about their family. And there's those moments, I'm going to get teary, because there's those moments of connection and pride in oneself, even when you're struggling, knowing you come from this amazing place, these amazing people, reminding you that you belong. But also, I learned from that the responsibility I have in staying connected and in that kindness, and that responsibility of everything she's taught me, I need to make sure I'm sharing that. And I work with a lot of reconnecting Métis people. They come and connect with me through art. And I know from watching that how important building those connections and those sense of belonging and community is to a person, not just for their own sense of who they are, but in their whole element of mental health, and then also being able to process and accept that they belong in these spaces.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned her. Clearly, she had an influence and a role with the Métis that would result in you meeting mayors and cabinet ministers and people of political persuasion. And then in the next breath, you talk about her encountering someone on the street who's of Métis descent, and then that, you know, in a crass sort of way, that's not something she needed to do, right? That was something that she wanted to do. That was very important to her, right? So I wonder if that's, you know, just to go back to the beginning of our discussion, and the fact that we're sitting in a building named for her and her portrait's on the wall and there's a gala in her honor, is that what someone's character is that why someone is so greatly respected and honored and cherished and their memory is kept alive? Is it somebody who's able to function in both those kinds of worlds, like that political sphere, but also so very much at that personal level as well? Is that what you mentioned, Delia Gray? Is that what Métis people in Alberta would think? Is kind of like those two sides that you just described, or is it even one side? It's just who she was. Like,
I think she saw people as just being people. I took that lesson from her and now I'm encountering people, politicians and people in business and even some celebrities, which is kind of fun. But whether to be to my detriment or not, I just see them as regular folk. And they just have an incredible journey and they've done some amazing things, and recognizing that. And I think that's where it comes down to, is she saw people as people. And especially people in community, they are special people because they belong. They're one of us.
It's funny. One of the things that was very important to President Audrey Patra, and you know, the book was her initial idea, The True Canadians, was to have a section, which we do, on recognition, and have a section on community. And then we added a section on reconciliation, which was culminated in, and I guess maybe partly inspired by the Pope's visit. It seems as though Delia embodies all of that. Like, you know, when you look at her biography and this vignette that we're looking at in our chapter on Métis women and everything that she did and achieved, it seems like she was one of those people that could cross cultures and cross communities from the sense of the stature of people. Because not everybody feels comfortable if they feel like they're, you know, in this realm of being in a political realm or business or whatever, and they don't feel like they can hobnob with less fortunate, I guess, you know.
It's absolutely fascinating to me knowing that she basically had a grade school education. So she was functionally literate. She spent a lot of time with university professors. She spent a lot of time with academics. She spent a lot of time, again, politics and everything, especially later in life. But I think she must have come to a realization that didn't matter. So I remind myself that in this grand scheme of what we know as Canadian society, we put so much value on, do you have letters after your name? You know, what have you accomplished? Have you received awards? That really doesn't matter. It's more of who you are and what you've done with with the gifts and the skills that you have. And gifts are definitely those internal things that we just naturally have an aptitude for, but it's also the things that have been given to us that we need to share.
You've talked to us, about this extraordinary character who was your grandmother, and the influence clearly she's had on Métis in Alberta, as is made evident by how much tribute is paid to her still today. But of course, what's really interesting, of course, is what that legacy meant for you. You're a Métis artist and a knowledge holder. You're a parent. You very clearly have a strong sense of Métis culture. What has been, to the extent that was something that came about as a result of her influence, was that the case? And is that something you think about often and care about on a regular basis? It influence you all the time, or is it just something that you are sort of aware of in the background?
Her words, her presence guides me all of the time. There's so many examples I can give of this, and it's just about, whittling it down to just a few. When I met my current partner, who's been my partner for 28 years, we met in university. I got pregnant. We weren't married. Okay. And we had one side of the family saying, you need to get married. You need to get married right now. And Cookon pulled me aside and she said, do you love him? And I was like, yes. Do you want to get married? I'm like, I think so. It's okay if you don't want to. You don't have to. That was mind-blowing because she was a very devout Catholic, but Catholic with an asterisk because it's Métis. There was some real life understandings that she had. And then she's been gone, and finding out more about her younger years, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But again, just back to values that she had that I think came from her own experience. So she had TB when she was quite young, ended up going up to Wabasca where she was, there were relatives there. They cured her TB, the aunties and whatnot. And she learned to become a midwife and learned a lot of the medicine, but she also learned about really traditional kinship ties and values. So she just wanted me to be happy. She wanted me to live my life the way that I needed to. And it was the 90s. So it wasn't horrible for me to be a single or an unmarried parent. I did get married, and she was fine with that. And it was lovely. She had a great time at the wedding. And she absolutely adores my partner, Rob. And it was really funny because her husband, my mushroom, his name is Robert. She has a daughter named Roberta and a son named Robert Jr. And she could never remember Rob's name. It was so funny. So, there was that. And then when I was little, when I would go over to her place, she would always encourage me. She noticed right away that I was good with my hands and creative and good with art, coloring, craftiness. So she tried to expose me to things as much as she could. She didn't bead, she did embroidery, she sewed. So as much as my little hands could handle, she would do some of that. But she also had her friends who could do those things that would come in and I learned a little bit. But then I became a teacher and it wasn't cool, so I didn't do it for some time. But even those teachings from way back when, I remember them, and they still come up every so often, those little memories that float around. So encouraging me in a way that even was outside her comfort circle. And then just seeing her again with community and understanding the importance of that, and watching this tiny woman, she's so short, but she'd come into a space and she'd have this presence, and she had no problem throwing that tiny little weight around and telling people what's what. That guides me all the time, for sure. I have a pair of moccasins I've made, And if anyone's been in some of my sessions, I talk about color. And color is medicine, and it's not just like people. It's a universal human thing. And there's colors that are defined by experiences that we are attracted or repelled from. There's things that are biologically that happen that we're attracted to color. But two of my very special colors are orange and purple because those are her favorite colors. And so I made these moccasins, and they are predominantly orange and purple. And it's because when I wear them, it's a physical reminder to make sure I'm walking in a good way that she guides me on. Yeah, I speak a lot. I speak a lot about her because she is such an important person in my life.
So you've used the term unique a couple of times now, today and earlier, and then just now. And what I'm really curious about is, the term unique suggests that somehow that means different than maybe your peers, other family members, people the community, the Métis community. And what's interesting about this, I'm curious about your perspective, is that, identity has been an issue historically with Métis. There's this code notion, and we talk about it in the book, of, hiding in plain sight. And you said right at the beginning, you didn't have that, and that's part of what made you unique. But I'm curious, are there a lot of people you've known where you sort of thought, oh, you're Métis, but you don't seem to accept it, or you feel like you don't want to accept it, or you've been coached by not accepting it?
I think I should say that I am everybody's second family's cousin. So there is an element where I could hide, and I choose not to. When I was younger, I did hide, and that was a survival, and I carry a lot of guilt about that. But then also talking to elders and talking to people I really respect, at the time, it's understandable. I think that also helps drive what I do now, because maybe it's partly penance, but it's also, I don't want anybody to feel ashamed of who they are or not feeling like they're able to share. There's an element of safety too. And that's a whole other discussion about being safe and, with your Indigenous identity out in the world. I think when I talk to people and I give an identity and not knowing who they are, or because you were talking about like a forced sense of identity in hiding, we have people in our community that have really negative experiences with community growing up with Métis identity in their families. And I do not blame them 1 second for not wanting to be a part of that. It actually breaks my heart because I would love for them to see the positive side. I want them to see that nurturing community side that they obviously have never experienced, or that trauma is so big. And every day I hope that maybe they'll find someone to connect with that'll start them on that journey. I also know that denying that part of yourself leaves such a huge hole in your spirit.
What's Delia's influence that might have been different from someone her generation?
Well, so what I did say before about how she spent time in Wabasca, her formative years, she was raised there with a very different idea about that community and kinship and where people fit. She was also ridiculously proud. I mean, the fact that her and Bob, were instrumental in opening the Friendship Center and, all of these other organizations. She would always tell me, my girl, you tell them you're Métis. My girl, we need to speak Cree. My girl, we need to, say what we need to say. And I would love for people to have someone like Delia who can encourage them and teach them it's okay to be proud of who you are. It's okay to come up against the wall of trauma and those negative experiences and those things that we might be protecting ourselves from, but to also to deal with that. Because even like all of the times I saw when she would come up to people who were struggling and she would start talking to them about who they are and where they come from and telling them a really good story. Those little moments, I hope everyone has a chance to have that with someone in community. I think it's just about self-value. I value myself.
It's funny, you mentioned the Native Friendship Center. We love putting these labels. In the vignette we talk about that all Native festival, the Aboriginal Veterans Society of Alberta, Métis Nation of Alberta, obviously, you know, and you know, these things, you can go on with these labels and you, oh, well, that's really cool. But none of that can really enunciate it the way you just described it, because that's not something that can be embodied by the title of either an individual, whether the president of something or the organization that they founded or represented. It's the actual working, it's the doing,
right.
You know?
Yeah, and it's getting the community buy-in. If Delia, if Cookham didn't believe in it, it didn't happen. I mean, I can tell you one story in particular about Audrey Putra. So in our family, Audrey's always been Audrey, and it's, you know, President Putra. Always, I have so much respect for Audrey. And I remember, this would have been 95, 96. I get a phone call from Cookham, and she says, there's going to be an election. And I'm like, okay. And she said, okay, I need to tell you some things. I'm like, okay. I was vaguely aware of what was happening politically with the Métis Nation. I knew that some bad things were also happening politically with individuals. There was talk about mismanagement of money. There was talk about open fraud. Like, there was these things going on. And yes, I did distance myself from that. And so I go over and we start talking, and she says, there is this amazing, well, she didn't use the word amazing. She's like, there's a woman you need to meet. Starts telling me about Audrey. And she's like, so when we go vote, you're going to go vote. And I'm like, okay, I'll go vote. And she's like, you're going to vote for Audrey. Don't get me wrong. I am a person that I will vote for who I believe I need to vote in. And yes, after looking at what was the options were, Audrey with the obvious choice. And she just felt so much hope. Delia felt so much hope and potential in who Audrey is and what she could do, and her vision. And the fact that Audrey was not doing it as a selfish act, was doing it for community. And so, yeah, after that, I had no problem. And it's just seeing where things have gone since. And that has been, honestly, a test for me of taking the values that Cookham had and seeing those values in Audrey, and everything that I've done. Every time I've gone to mark a ballot for any election, even in my own way of what I do, if those aren't the reasons why you're doing it, you shouldn't be doing it. And so even now with Andrea, the current president, to me, she passed the Delia test. And the thing is that because Cookham supported Audrey, other people supported Audrey without question. When Bob and Delia were setting up the Friendship Center, they had no problem getting community buy-in because they saw that they were doing it for the good reasons, for the right reasons. They were doing it to build community. They were doing it to strengthen community. They were doing it to help people.
You know, it's funny. You make me think of this horrible cliche that people have used for decades. Behind every great man, there's a something woman. Greater woman, more amazing woman. I don't know I forget what the adjective is, but you make me think about when you know that somebody is out there who could do great things, and often those people are modest people. Mm-hmm. They're not, the most effective politicians are not politicians. They're not career politicians. They almost have to be cajoled into it because, as you point out, in the case of President Potter, it's like, hey, I got other things to do, right? Yep. I don't necessarily need this. What you need, though, is someone like your grandmother. You need someone who's going to say, we need you. Yeah. Right? So you need great people to identify and get great people to take on these roles, right?
We joke in our house that when it comes to the Métis people and the Métis community, the Métis Nation, you don't get a choice. If the people decide that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. And, it started off when you're little. If Cookham says you're going to do it, you do it. When community says you're going to do it, you do it. Yes. And I was going to say every major movement that has happened, especially when you're looking at Indigenous rights, it's usually women and femme, non-binary, who are at the helm.
Isn't that something? That's a great place to break. We're going to take a break right now with Krista Leddy. We'll be back in a minute.
Hi, this is Audrey Petra. Today, we are going to talk about an amazing person, Delia Gray. Delia was our first provincial elder at the Métis Nation, beginning in 1996. She truly was a person who loved her Métis history, who loved to share with everyone. Delia would spend hours on November 16th coming to our office and visiting with staff, with leaders, and talking about the importance of knowing the Métis history, the importance of knowing who you were, and how important it was to be proud of who you were as a Métis person. Delia always attended all of our functions with us. She was always there, ready and willing to participate in anything we were doing that involved the Métis Nation. She wanted to share her family history. She wanted to share always about the communities that she knew so well and that she was so proud of. We got to know Delia's family, her children, her grandchildren. And it's so great today to see that her granddaughter, Krista Leddy, she is now does amazing beadwork, is an artist, and does beautiful work. And she certainly is following in her grandma's footsteps. Always at all of our events, always there, teaching someone how to do something. And that in itself is a history that will carry on, I'm sure, to the next generation.
We're back with Krista Leddy, and after a great discussion in the first half, which we finished up talking about President Poitras, who only recently stopped being President Poitras of the Métis Nation of Alberta. But it's a great jumping off point to talk more broadly, in addition to the influence of Delia, about Métis women. And I want to share with you, before we continue, a story that I loved from the book by Jean Taillé, The Northwest is Our Mother, about Marguerite Kirkness. And Jean Taillé obviously did some really interesting research in her book when she talks about Métis women and their accomplishments. She talks about how the Hudson Bay Company had this fisherman who would provide the amazing amount of excellent fish. They had a great relationship, they had a contract going. Well, then there was a domestic dispute and his wife left him. And all of a sudden, the fish fell off. And Hudson Bay were like, oh my goodness, I mean, we needed this supply. And so they sent emissaries out to talk to this guy. They thought he must be like completely decimated and, wrecked because of the loss of his wife. And that wasn't the case. And after they asked around and talked to some different people, they found out, oh, the problem is that she's the one that knew how to fish. And so they actually then sent these people out to go find her and beg her to come back. And that was Jean Taillé's little anecdote about how to talk about how ingrained, how deep, how historic Métis influence women have as in terms of the influence on Métis culture and history and the economy, I guess, even as well. So bringing us back to the present, although you're welcome to comment on that history.
Oh, well, first of all, probably every Métis woman, feminine, who's listening is going to be like, oh yeah, and?
Yeah, tell me something I don't know.
In my work, because I do a lot of cultural work and historical work, the stories of women are always kind of hidden and spoken over. And what people don't realize is that women ran a lot of things. Women, like even with art, with beautiful beadwork and embroidery and whatnot, sometimes when they were trading that, it made more money than whatever their husbands were doing to support the fur trade. So yeah, women being the economic force, even during like furs, quite often women actually did the trap line and were better at it. So stories like that, it makes me smile. Yeah.
And then to compare that to society, to the colonial society, you have to follow that same, not the same pattern, but over the course of the same time frame, it'd be interesting to look at the different perspectives on, the male, female, that binary, that dynamic, which even nowadays is kind of going by the wayside. But how women are thought and their involvement in the family, and then their involvement in economics, and then the movement of what they call the feminist movement out there that started in the 1960s. But anyway, another topic. But we were talking about President Patra.
Yeah.
And there's someone. I mean, there's an example. Last 27 years, what has been her influence and legacy that in your view? I mean, it's a tough question to narrow down to a podcast episode, but I mean, it's certainly something that can't be ignored.
It's unbelievable. I have to say, again, just with the work that I do and being places, there is always going to be criticism. There's always those people that are criticizing. And I have to ask why. Are they criticizing because of their own need to be in places? Are they criticizing because their selfish needs? Or is there a legitimate reason? Is there a legitimate issue? I find with Audrey, just like how Cookham could go up to these politicians and people that in our society had this high rank and just treat them like ordinary folk. I try and do that as well. And with Audrey, I have so much respect because it is earned. Seeing what she has done, how she navigated the systems, not only within the Métis Nation, because that was a big mess to clean up, and I think that's been an incredible job, but working with civil governments, provincial governments, federal governments, and getting to where we are now. I honestly don't believe that we would be where we are right now in the sense of Métis rights, recognition, economic opportunities, education opportunities, all of these things. Even myself as an artist doing what I do and people paying me money to do what I do really comes from that work that Audrey does.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous.
Audrey has brought a certain respect in government towards Métis people and has also shown that strength, the resiliency, but also that we will fight and we will do it well and we're smart about it. And so I have so much respect for Audrey. Audrey has been fantastic in bringing good people with those right skills around, seeing that and being able to navigate that. Also, dang, when she wants to have a salty speech with a little bit of spice, nails it every time. It's awesome.
Little change in the tone of the cadence, right? And there was I wasn't going to mention it because we don't have all day for me to be telling stories in a podcast episode, but now that you mentioned that there was a tribute to her some time ago in the spring, and one of the people that was invited to speak on the stage was a leader from another province, and he talked about how Audrey would sit there and she'd be quiet, but then eventually she'd start doing the little paper rustling, and he was like, "Now you know, here it comes," and they would start usually with the word "no."
There's also a hair flick.
Okay, maybe that was it.
I think all of that respect is justly earned and has set us up as Métis people to do more great things. When she announced that she was stepping down, which of course I am so happy because she has worked so hard and she deserves that. I was also a little bit like, what's going to happen next? I think the person that the nation has chosen for the next president Andrea is definitely going to fit those shoes quite nicely. And we as Métis people need to make sure that we are standing up and supporting them and knowing them that we support them, because that's a hard place to be as a strong woman in those spaces. But the work speaks for itself. I'm so excited to see where we are going as a people. And it's not just me. When I talk to youth, they're really excited to see themselves represented in that leadership. Exactly.
And what's interesting is that that's historically not entirely unusual among the Métis. We mentioned this in the book that Cassidy Caron became, as you point out, like the president of the Métis National Council under the age of 30, which Louis Riel was, and which Cuthbert Grant was who are two Cuthbert Grant, launched the first major offensive, I guess you could call it, with a flag and into battle, in the Battle of Frog Plain, they call it, there in Winnipeg, in the vicinity of what is now Rainbow Stage, best as I can tell, up North Main Street. And of course, Louis Riel and everything that he accomplished. It seems to be quite a testament to the confidence of the Métis to put somebody like that, a young female, out there in a position where you're going to be interacting with prime ministers and premiers and people who might have more experience, but it's like, well, that's not who we are. Talk about that a bit.
You know what? It's not even just putting the person out there. Yes, as a community, we decide that's a person that's going to represent us, but it's not like you just take the person and just throw them out there and say, there you go. Then we close the door and watch through a crack to see what happens. The community standing behind that person, right? That's what we do. That's what we used to do with our governance, is we would pick the best person for the job and then support them in that job. And when the job is finished, give them that chance to rest. And then the next issue comes up, choose the best person for the job. So Cassidy, in that role, it's the community choosing the best person for the job. And I know Cassidy has a really great support system. So President Karen has this wonderful support system around her. But again, just we as Métis people will also need to make sure that we are standing up for people that we believe in, that we know are acting in our best interests. And most of the major events or major movements that have advanced Indigenous rights, that have advanced Indigenous opportunities, have been led by women. Even the American Indian movement in the 60s and 70s. While, there's these men that their names are recognized, it was actually started by women, and it was women doing the work. It was women building the connections.
We talk in the book about women such as Bertha Clark Jones and Laura McLaughlin, and we talk about the New Dawn Métis Women's Society.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are some pretty potent legacies there and pretty potent organizations.
Laura is special to me because Laura was a weaver and an artist, and being an artist and doing traditional arts. And, Laura was quite a character. And I remember when she was very curtly showing me how the loom works and how to fix a loom. And it was out of love. It was not out of, Laura is another person that inspires me to keep doing what we're doing. For example, we have just started a weaving program with the Métis Nation. So we started an artist collective a year and a bit ago. And with that, in her legacy of bringing back those arts of weaving and that sash and the pride in sash, that has inspired, the community to invest in creating more weavers so that we can make our own sashes. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's huge when you look at how we are reclaiming our identity, how we're reclaiming those important pieces that tell our story, and how they've evolved to tell the contemporary Métis story. That is so important. And someone like Laura taking the hits, doing the hard work, shows the value of that and has set the path forward. So it's incredibly important to recognize and remember people.
So you've done a great job over this conversation of being modest about your own accomplishments, but we'll spend our last few minutes talking about what you affectionately refer to as Rainbow Louis.
Yes.
And this seems to be something very dear to you and something that's very well known out in the community and the broader community in Canada. So we're not going to let you get away with that, Father.
A few years ago, I was approached by a Métis graphic designer, Sean Vincent, who's in Winnipeg, that Canadian Geographic was looking for somebody to create art around Louis Riel for a story. And so he asked me, and we had some conversations, and I was like, I'm going to bead Louis Riel. So I beaded a portrait of Louis Riel. My cookum taught me so much about our old ways of kinship. And just because they're old ways, and I talk about contemporary Métis, it doesn't mean the things that change are the details, but not the spirit and the substance. So the spirit and the substance that I was taught was that everybody has a place in our community. It doesn't matter who you love. It doesn't matter how you dress. It doesn't matter how you show the world who you are. It doesn't matter, you know, if you feel that you were born into the wrong space, the wrong body, the wrong skin. Everybody has space. And so I was told that the magazine would be published in June. It was a July issue, but it'd be published in June.
That's Canadian Geographic?
Yeah,
You're talking
Canadian Geographic.
now, yeah.
So I very purposefully made my portrait of Louis Riel a rainbow. And there's hidden images in there, you know, flowers and infinities and whatnot. But I wanted that to be out there because it hurts my heart so much when I see a very colonized way of thinking taking over some of our communities and our families and spaces. And so people like Delia, people like Audrey, people who've put themselves out there in the line of fire and for the betterment of our people, gave me the courage to be proud of who I am and put that there. Now, in my own identity, and I don't talk a lot about this out in public, and so I guess this is like the first time I'm saying this in a podcast. My own identity, I am in a cis-normative relationship with the same person for a very long time. But my own identity is I walk that rainbow. So I've just never had to really talk about it because that's not my life that I live. But I know who I am. And so that when people say horrible things, when they exclude community, when they are not actually wanting to think about kinship and proper connections and how we're supposed to love our community, it hurts me. It hurts everybody. So I did Rainbow Louie. I got a lot of criticism about Rainbow Louie. And again, knowing what I've been taught, that having, being such a formative piece of my spirit, seeing all of these really strong people going out and doing the right thing has let me deal with that quite well. To the point now where I get some of the hate comments and I kind of find them funny. This has also taught me to, as an artist, to create what is truly in my spirit. So everything I make, I mean, Indigenous art is incredible because we put so much of ourself in it. We put so much of our stories. There's so many layers. And it's not just the image. It's also, how did that image come to be? The materials we're using, the way it was made, the time it was made out. There's all of this depth to it. It's not just a pretty picture or a pretty piece. And this just adds more and more depth and layers to what I do. And I think maybe that's why I'm successful in my art, because of that. I honestly would not be the artist today that I am without my cookum loving me, accepting me, and supporting me, but also thrusting me out there. And I would not be the artist I am today without support from the Métis community, the Métis Nation. The Métis Nation has been awesome in helping me and find opportunities, but giving me opportunities and helping me find opportunities for other people. And that is, I just have to sit in a state of pure gratitude for the community to be where I am, that I can make a living making art and telling stories and being Métis. So.
You know, it's you've been talking about Delia and we've talked about Audrey Patra and Cassidy Caron and accomplishments of females and politics, but you've talked to us about culture and art, and this is a conversation that has transcended gender and race. It's, I think you've given us a lesson, I think that extends well beyond that into human society. Thank you for your time, Krista.
You know,
I really appreciate it.
Otipemisiwak means the people that rule themselves, right? And I think as individuals, and that also encapsulates we as Métis people need to be who we are, right? So we rule ourselves, and our society, our community has enough space for everyone and so many skill sets. And the minute that we embrace what everybody can do, where we are now is incredible, but it'll be so much more.
Couldn't be said better. Thank you for being with us.